Welcome to this Oracle Virtual Developer Day. My name is Grant Ronald and I'm Director of Product Management in Oracle's Application Development Tools division. So in this session, I'll be posing a number of questions. Do you have an investment in forms? And could that be an investment in forms applications? Or are we also talking about investment of skills with your people who are still very much skilled around using products like Oracle Forms and PL SQL as a programming language? And we'll look at what the choices are, and if you're looking at ADF, why this might be the closest match to the existing skills and the applications you have if you're choosing to develop on the Java platform. So today's agenda, I'll start off by having a quick overview of Oracle's statement of direction. I'll then look at some of the motivating factors you might consider to choose Oracle ADF Application Development Framework. We'll then look at how you can map some of the concepts, the skills, the features that you're probably familiar with from Oracle Forms and how we can map those to Oracle ADF. And then we'll close this session by looking at some of the resources that we have available for you for learning the technology and skilling up on Oracle ADF. So before we go too far, let's take a quick moment to recognize where we are with forms and the roadmap forward for forms. If you're using Oracle Forms for your current applications based around Oracle Database, PL SQL skills, data entry styles, and those applications requirements are being met by Oracle Forms, then you can keep those applications in Oracle Forms. If it's the right tool for you, you should be using it. However, we do want you to look at other technology options that may complement or give you features of functionality that you wouldn't natively have available in Oracle Forms. The second point here is we want you to understand why maybe change is something you're considering. What are the motivating factors for looking at change or moving away from forms or adopting other technologies? Is it because you want to engage in new markets such as internet selling or mobile access where maybe Forms isn't the right fit for those styles of applications? In which case, maybe change is a good thing. Or are you looking at change because your users want a much more modern interface? Again, that might be a reasonable point, but often with Forms applications, users require a very highly efficient data entry style of interface, and in which case a much more modern Facebook self-service style of UI might not give the users the data entry capabilities they actually need in a day-to-day job. So you have to understand what's driving change. And I think that in many cases you'll be looking at changing technologies because there is some underlying business driver for change. What you have to do is ensure you have a clear vision of what those drivers for change are. And in fact, this comes nicely into my next point. Oracle ADF is not the next Forms. It's not an evolution of Forms. It's not Forms 2014. It's a different technology platform with different tools and in some cases a different style of application development and different style of application you can get out at the end. So because you're looking at changing technologies, you should be also looking at exploiting the power or the sweet spot of the new technology that you're moving to. Now, I often hear customers who are looking to maybe do a one-to-one replacement of Forms with a clone developed in ADF. Now, my question would be, what do you really want to achieve by doing that? You'll spend effort, time, money on doing this, and yet you have something which will closely mimic what you had before. I'd be much more inclined to justify the effort of change by improving the application or offering new business functions or channels. That helps justify the effort that goes into this. Now, when we talk about migration, the question sometimes arises, is there a magic bullet for migration? Can you take a Forms application and automatically transform it into ADF or Java? Well, technically, yes, some third parties can offer automated solutions, but you have to ask, is this what you want, and is the result a well-formed application? The ideal for a well-formed application would be one that should be indistinguishable from an application you've written from scratch. But the challenge here is, as I stated earlier, changes in technology are also the opportunity to drive other changes. But if you go for a very heavily automated solution, you can't always predict what changes you may want to make, and these tend to then push you more to a like-for-like migration. And certainly in my experience, automatic migration solutions tend to have very limited resemblance to how an application would be developed from the ground up. So for example, an automated solution might migrate forms, triggers, and lines of code, exactly one for one. Whereas if you're doing a brand new development, you might look at a collection of triggers and code that perform a particular function and recognize that that could be implemented in ADF in a different way, or maybe even a codeless way that the framework already provides. So really, to summarize, I want you to look at the big picture. What are the motivators for making change? Can you justify the effort for making change as well? And it's not just about which tool you choose. It's not about ADF or JDeveloper is better than Oracle Forms, but you've got to look at what's the business solution I'm trying to create? What's the right tool for that job? And in many cases, you might even have a hybrid mix of Oracle Forms applications living side by side with ADF applications that offer different channels for access. Okay, so why ADF? Why is it important to Oracle, and why should it be important to you? Well, the first thing to recognize is Oracle ADF is actually incredibly important to Oracle itself. So you may well be aware of our Fusion applications or cloud applications, where our apps like HCM, procurement, etc. have been redeveloped on the Java platform, and it's actually Oracle ADF that underpins those Fusion applications as well. And many of our own products, such as Web Center, such as BPM, even things like our support portal, are also developed in Oracle ADF. So there's a very strong initiative within Oracle to use our own frameworks for our own applications and products and tools as well. And it's driving many of our future initiatives. So you may well hear a lot of messaging around mobile and cloud, and Oracle ADF is the technology that underpins those solutions as well. And apart from anything else, regardless of its importance within Oracle itself, it is a very highly productive Java framework and addresses some of the, or many of the challenges we have in the Java world, where you have to bring together collections of framework to make these things to work together. Whereas Oracle ADF is a complete framework from end to end, from your business source to your user interface, and provides things like security, customization, etc., all the way through that framework. So it's a very highly productive framework on its own right as well. Now, the question we might now ask is, who's it for? Who would be using Oracle ADF? Who would be a typical developer? Well, if you're coming from a Forms, PL SQL background, or an Oracle development background, let's call it Oracle development background, then JDeveloper and Oracle ADF might be the platform and development tools that you'll be using, because you'll be using tools, for example, like BPM, or because you're choosing to rebuild new applications and you're coming from a Forms, PL SQL background. So in a similar manner to how we have changed our e-business suite applications, moving from Forms to ADF, and those skills that we had around PL SQL and Forms have evolved, then you might be choosing to follow that same path as an Oracle developer. You might come to ADF as a Java developer. It may well be that you're new to Oracle. You might not even have Oracle database in the back end as your business source, but you may want to have a productive framework in order to make your Java development quicker, more productive as well. So you might be coming from ADF from a Java background. We have those who are coming across ADF from a Fusion development background. So people who are implementing Fusion applications, or who have customized Fusion applications in-house, and they need to customize or enhance or augment those applications. Well, you might be using ADF from that background as well. SOA web services developers, if you're building using tools like Beeple or Service Bus, then it may well be ADF you're using to build those services together. And as I touched on quickly earlier, mobile is a pretty hot topic, and if you're looking to develop web applications access from mobile devices, or you're driven to create on-device mobile applications, then lo and behold, you'll probably be choosing Oracle ADF and JDeveloper as your development tools in order to build on a mobile background or a mobile platform. Web Center as well, and even database developers. Oracle JDeveloper has the ability to connect to your database and perform a number of development tasks through JDeveloper as well. So there are a number of different approaches or paths that might bring you to Oracle ADF, not just simply as a development tool for redeveloping or rebuilding forms applications on the Java platform. So let's look at how some of the concepts that you might be familiar with from your forms and PL SQL experiences actually map quite closely to Oracle ADF. Now, it's worth saying that in many cases, Oracle Forms as a product or a tool or a framework is in fact solving many of the same problems that we're trying to solve with Oracle ADF. So for example, in many cases you have information in a database, and what you want to do is pull information out of that database into an application, perform some functions, validation, etc., and push that out to the user. So you'll be mapping your database tables into things or objects within inside your application that you'll be manipulating. So in the forms world, that would be your data blocks. You'll be providing validation points, because as information comes into your application, you might want to validate that salary is below a certain value, and that's a validation point that's specific to the application and not necessarily within the database. So you have application validation hooks. You'll want to develop pages of your applications, and you'll want user interface components, buttons, checkboxes, text fields. You'll want to define a flow between the pages in your applications, like call form and open form and forms. And of course, there are many other helper objects or features that make life much easier. So list of values is a very useful feature. You might argue it's not an essential thing in building an application, but it's a very useful feature to have. Calculated fields is another thing. Having security built into your application that can be easily hooked up or turned on or turned off is also an important thing as well. So having those helper features into your application is pretty useful as well. So let's look at some more specifics on how forms and ADF can map concepts. So in forms, we have the concept of a data block, and a data block represents your table, your underlying database table inside your forms application. Well, in ADF we have the same thing. It has a different name. In fact, it's split into two different objects called an entity object and a view object. But together these things are providing the exact same function as a data block. It's providing some sort of object in your application that's mapping to a database table and holding data in your application while you manipulate it before you then commit it back down to the database. Typically in forms, you don't just bring in every record from the database. You want to bring in only certain records, and you want to order them in a specific way for your application. So there is a property in a block that allows you to define an order by and a where clause. Well, lo and behold, we have the exact same thing on our entity and our view objects, or our view object specifically, where we can define the order that data comes back and which actual records come back from the database. We have lists of values in Oracle Forms that allow us to define a list and associate that with a field. For example, job ID can have a list showing the various job roles. We have that same function in ADF as well. The ability to define a list of data associated with a specific data field or attribute. And closely linked to LOVs is record groups. These provide the data for a list of values, and again we have the exact same concept in ADF. In this case we call it view objects. And when it comes to the user interface, Oracle Forms is deployed as an applet, or the user interface is deployed as an applet, and we have roughly about 21 different components, buttons, text fields, checkboxes. In ADF, we have the same concept, ADF Faces as our user interface layer, but there's actually about 150 components there. So we have the same things as Forms. We have text boxes, check boxes, buttons, etc. But we also have things like different graphing components, gauges, geographic maps, carousels, data tables, tree controls, those kind of things as well. So many of the components map, but we also have a huge number of additional components in the ADF world as well. And in Forms, you had more than one form in your application typically, and you had to navigate using call form or open form. We have that exact same requirement in ADF, and in fact it's presented a much probably easier way to develop, that we have the concept of a task flow in ADF, and a task flow is simply a flow between pages that you can actually define using a diagram. So you can create a diagram that shows the flow of your application or subsections of your application, and you can define this very visually. Some other common building blocks, well, in Forms you had many triggers. A post query trigger, for example, would often be used to look up information. So for example, department ID, you might look up the department name to show some meaningful information rather than just the ID. Well, we have that exact same requirement in ADF. It's using something called an entity object lookup, but again, exact same concept. And in fact, in ADF, this is a completely codeless solution, whereas in Forms, you'd probably have to write your own select statement. In Forms, we have many validation triggers, and again, we have those same validation points in Oracle ADF. Within what's called the entity object, you have quite a rich declarative validation framework that allows you to set things like high value, low value, a list of possible values, and you can even call out to Java if you want to write a more complex rule and make it very easy to hook up that Java method to the validation framework within ADF. In Oracle Forms, you'd have your transactional triggers, your whenever you create a record or post data or commit data back to the database. Well, there's a hook or a method within ADF called doDML. And any code you put before the doDML is in effect a pre type of trigger, and anything you put afterwards is a post style of trigger as well. So you can see that essentially these concepts are mapping actually quite closely, albeit that it might be slightly different names that we have to learn. In Oracle Forms, you can have a summary or a formula value. And then we have the exact same concept in ADF, but we call it a transient attribute. You could create libraries of user interface components in Oracle Forms in an object library. Well, we have the exact same concept. We just call them declarative components. And again, probably it's fair to say much richer than the functionality that we have within Oracle Forms. And with Forms, when you have data fields within your data block, you can define labels, you can define tooltip text, you can define formats for things like dates. And again, within an entity or a view object, each attribute, which maps to your underlying column in the database, has a property, which is its label, its hint or its tooltip text, and how that information is formatted, for example, currency or date fields. So these are all pretty much the core kind of tools that you use, or elements or features within a Forms application as you build Forms. And as you can see, it's all one-to-one mapping, and in many cases the way that we implement this in ADF is it's actually more declarative or less code-centric than we have in Oracle Forms, and it does in many cases provide richer functionality. Now, having shown that Oracle Forms and Oracle ADF map many of the same concepts, I also want to recognize that in many cases Oracle ADF provides much more as a framework in terms of features and functionality than you have in Oracle Forms. So the capabilities, the things you can do, are much more extensive. So for example, Oracle Forms has a very tight coupling between the user interface and the data or the business logic within your Forms application. ADF actually splits out the architecture of the ADF application so that the business service layer and the user interface are two separate elements that you develop in isolation or can develop in isolation. Why is this important? Well, it gives you huge amounts of flexibility. It means that a business service could be deployed as a web service and accessed in a UI-less form, so that you don't always have to access business functionality from a user interface. It could be consumed by another application via something like a web service. So this UI data split actually gives you a huge amount of power. It also means that, you know, a piece of data like a table of records, for example, employee records, could be viewed or visualized on the screen in many different ways. So you could have it displayed as a table, a graph, some other type of gauge component, all pointing at the same piece of data. And again, that was much more difficult to implement in Forms without duplicating or mirroring some of your data fields or data blocks. Oracle ADF also provides hooks into other products, or other products often hook into ADF. So you might be developing workflows or business processes through tools like BPM, and it may well be that you develop parts of your Forms or your ADF application as a result of being driven through the BPM tool. You may be using a tool like Web Center to build websites or portals or landing pads for your applications. And again, you could potentially be bringing in functionality from those tools to exploit within your ADF application. You could be building portlets, you could be using things from the Web Center portfolio to add functionality to your ADF application. Oracle ADF also hooks into a whole bunch of other technologies and tools and products that help you as a developer. So various configuration management tools like Subversion, SVN are supported, so that within ADF or JDeveloper you can automatically check in, check out files, do merges, branches, etc. There are hooks into application lifecycle management tools so that you can log bugs, for example, directly from JDeveloper using the interfaces there. You could use automated build systems like Hudson or Maven or integration solutions as well, so that you can provide automated builds, and test is something that happens on a daily or nightly basis as well. So again, these are all additional features that coming from the Forms world you might not maybe have been able to exploit in the past. Oracle ADF also provides quite an extensive personalization and customization layer. What do we mean by that? It means that you can build an application once, but if you deploy it to 5 or 6 different customers, that application can be very easily customized for the specific requirements of each of those customers. It can even be personalized, so within a particular user might choose to have, for example, the data in a table presented in a different way. For example, maybe the column ordering is different, and ADF provides the feature that those personalizations or customizations can be easily defined and then easily applied to a user's instance, or a site instance, or a customer's instance of the application. There's also things like connection pooling. So in the forms world, one user, one database connection, 1,000 users, 1,000 database connections. Now, there is obviously a cost with every database connection you have there. Now, what ADF does is it says, well, look, there's quite a lot of think time in any application. There's time when the user's sipping a cup of tea, they're not hitting the keyboard, and in those times, that user's connection could be shared with someone else who's actually doing work at that point. So ADF provides features that allows the pooling of resources such as database connections, so that, for example, you might have 500 users being serviced by only 20 database connections, for example, and they're sharing. And the framework provides features to do this automatically for you as well. And of course, where in the forms world we were very much tied to an Oracle database, in the ADF world, the database or the Oracle database is only one potential source for your data. It could be coming from web services, it could be coming from adapters, from packaged applications, from Excel spreadsheets. It really doesn't matter to ADF. So again, where you were very tied to database with Oracle Forms, you have a whole bunch of other options with Oracle ADF. And other areas where you can really extend the capabilities with ADF, and again, go much further than you could with Oracle Forms, are things like the graphics and the analytics. So although in the past we've had a tool, Oracle Graphics, essentially Oracle Forms has been very limited in how it can graphically represent information to the end user. With ADF, we have a much richer library of graphic and analytical components which allow you to present information in a much more intuitive or interactive way for the users. So for example, there are bar charts, line charts, funnel charts, pie charts, a lot of different styles of charting capabilities. There's things like gauge components, and gauge components are really useful for showing, for example, levels in between different thresholds as a good use case for gauge components. We have things like hierarchy charts as well for viewing hierarchical information. And there's things like Gantt charts, timeline charts as well. And there's a massive range of different components. So again, in the forms world where you were pretty much limited to presenting as a form or as a multi-row block, here we could present information in a way that maybe is much more engaging to the user. And again, this comes back to this question or point about embracing change. You have much richer capabilities within ADF, and how can you exploit those capabilities if you're choosing to move from forms to ADF? And the other area where you might be looking to extend the capabilities of your business applications will be mobile or tablet. I mean, there's a great push or demand for access from mobile devices to business applications. And how do you start building applications that run on device? Again, ADF provides a whole set of features within the framework, and ADF Mobile you'll maybe learn more about in this virtual developer day, for building applications based on the same skills you have with ADF, Java and the ADF framework, but you can build and deploy on tablets, iOS, Android and phones as well. But before we get too carried away, we must remember one thing. This is Java. Okay, we're running on the Java platform, and we do have a very common question that says, well, if I'm going to use ADF, do I need to know Java? And the answer is yes, you do. You're building on the Java platform. Java language is pretty much a prerequisite. In the same way as that I could say that for forms, you could build a forms application without using PL SQL, but typically you will write PL SQL code, and the more you know, the more you'll get out of that. However, with ADF, what we are doing is providing you a framework that abstracts you away from many of the complexities of the Java platform, and in many cases the code that you're writing is at a pretty basic level. Certainly at the beginning, as you're building ADF applications, the types of Java information or Java knowledge you have to have or required would be things like, data types. You understand what a string is, what's your numeric types, what are the different data types you'll require. How do you write a conditional statement? What's the if then else style of statement? What's a loop? Is it a while loop? Is it a for loop? What constructs are they for looping around information? And I'll possibly want to have some basic knowledge of some of the APIs that ADF presents. So how do I get a connection to my database if I want to call a database PL SQL routine, for example. At the more intermediate level, you'll probably be wanting to understand how you write exception handlers. You might want to understand a little bit more about lists and arrays, and casting, which is the ability to force one type to another type, or cast a type if you have two different data types. But the key point here is that with Oracle ADF, the amount of Java knowledge you require, certainly at the beginning, is relatively basic, and as you learn more Java, you can exploit more features of the underlying platform as well. So let's see all of this in a demo. So this is us in JDeveloper, and let's create a brand new application, and it's going to be a web application. We have different styles of application: mobile applications, desktop, and let's call it Virtual Developer Day 1, 2, 3. Okay, and this just creates the outline for the application. Now, in Forms, we would use the data block wizard to create business services based on database tables. We have something called business components from tables in ADF. So let's first create a connection to the database. Test a connection. And there we can see our database tables, and we're going to build this application based on our old friends, departments, employees, and jobs. So this is entity objects I'm creating, and then I'll create something called views. And as we said earlier, these are just like the Forms data blocks. I'll miss out this list app and finish. And what JDeveloper has done is it's created some metadata exactly the same way as Forms does, that mimics or models those tables inside the application. So let's start shaping this data. So I had a departments table, an employees table, and a jobs table, and we have a view object for each one of those. So let's go into our employees view object, and you'll see that for each column in the database we have an attribute. And in fact, we can start tailoring the attributes for the application. So if we don't need to see the phone number for this application, we can remove that. If we don't need to see hire date, we can remove that as well. And we might want to change the query that brings employees into the application. At the moment, we're bringing all employee records, but we could say something like order by last name. And we could add a where clause so that we only bring back the records we particularly need. So again, order by where clause, exactly as we had in Oracle Forms. Another thing we can do here is that we can see that we're bringing back these attributes. Now, job ID, or let's say department ID, is maybe not very useful. We'd rather see department name. That's more useful to our end user. So we can say that this view is based on not only the employees table, but also some information from the departments table. And that means we can now say this view, again like a data block in Forms, and we'll add an attribute from the departments entity, which is department name. So now, as well as bringing back an employee record, we're also going to bring back the department name for the department ID for that record. And this is exactly what typically a post query was used for in Oracle Forms, where you would bring back or do a lookup. So there you can see I've brought back the department name, and you can actually see that if you look in the query how that works. Now that's as if I've created my data blocks and forms, and we have this concept in JDeveloper, an application module, which is just like a form, where a form would typically create or use many data blocks. Well, let's create our unit of transaction, and we'll call this the application module. And here are our views of data, and we could view all departments, we could view all employees, but if I want to, for example, say only view employees for a specific department, then I do that. Now, how did JDeveloper know that there's a relationship here? Well, it recognized a primary foreign key relationship and built something called a link, or a view link, that allows these things to be linked. So here I'm viewing all departments. Here I have the opportunity to bring back employees for a particular department, and if I want to view all employees, we can do that. So master detail, and here's all employees. So the final things I'll do here are, let's look at our employees view. We have an attribute called job ID, but rather than showing the job ID to the user, wouldn't it be nice if we could present a list of values? And we can do that here. We say list of values. So for this attribute, I want to add a list of values, and the list is coming from my jobs view. That's just like my jobs data block in forms, or jobs record group in the forms world. And the thing I want to bring back is job ID. So we're bringing job ID from the jobs table into job ID of the employees view object. And then I can decide, well, how do I want, when we create a user interface, we can display this as a combo box or list box. Let's have a combo box, and the information I want to display is job ID and job title. In fact, let's have job title first, because that's more useful. The other thing I mentioned earlier was that we can have UI hints. And user interface hints are, when we build the UI, what will be the default label used for this field, or this attribute? By default, it's the name of the attribute, so it'll be last name, but we can have something that's a little bit more application specific here, and here's where we put our help in. Okay, so let's save our project. The last thing we'll do is let's add some validation. So for my employees entity object, and again we can kind of think of this as a forms data block. Here we can see we have salary, and I'm going to add a validation rule or a business rule. It's exactly like when validate item. And JDeveloper actually offers a number of very rich validation options. You can have compare, so compare against a value. A salary is maybe in a list of potential values. It could be within a range, or we could even call out a Java method to validate the salary. Let's keep it really simple and say that salary must be greater than the value of 1,000. And we can have a literal value there, or we could actually bring that data back from another table, like the jobs table, where we see the minimum and maximum salary. Okay, now although we haven't built a user interface, we can actually run and test this in our business components tester. And there you can see I've got departments, and there I can see departments for a specific employee, or I can look at all employees, and there you can see that we're bringing back the department name. That's like the post query in the forms world. Here we have our list of values, and we have our validation rules here as well. And there's our error message. So having created the business service in our model project, let's show how we can develop the user interface. Well, in the forms world, you use call form and open form to define your navigation between forms, but it's actually much more simple in ADF. We just create what's called a page flow or a task flow, and here you can actually define the flow of your pages visually. So I've got page 1, and page 1 happens to navigate to page 2 on some action called go page, and then it navigates back as well. So we haven't actually created the pages yet, but here's the flow, and we can build up quite complex flows of applications using this technique. So let's actually create the pages, and again in the forms world we'd create a canvas, and we have a similar concept here. We have a page. It can be based on a template, or it can be based on some of the predefined layouts that we have. So if you want a particular layout to your page, it's looking something like that, you can do so. And here's your page. And just like forms, we have a bunch of components that we have available. So we have lists, we have lists of values, we can have layout components which help manage how information is laid out in the page. But the other way we can do layout is, and again this is akin to the forms data block and layout wizard, where the business service or the blocks that you create can also be default layout on a canvas. Here's the business service we created earlier, departments, employees, and I can actually just drag and drop these onto a page. So for example, if I want employees to be shown on this page, I drop it on, and this way we're saying JDeveloper offers here are the components the visual components you could bind this page to: a read-only form, a search form, or a table. So let's have a form. And there you can see the types of components that will be used by default, and they'll be automatically bound to those components or business data elements or attributes that we created earlier. And of course I can still add individual components here as well. There's toolbar buttons. Let's look for a button and add a button onto the page, and that button has properties just like in the forms property palette you had as well. Go next page, and the action of pressing that button, like a when button press trigger, is go page. So what is go page? Well, that means go to that navigation flow and navigate to this page. So you can see that we're quite easily building up navigation flow like call form and open form. And here we're designing the page, either dragging components on to the page or dragging our business service representation onto the page and binding that to UI components. Now in that demo I've obviously been very limited in time on how to create something that's very visually appealing, but I just want to show you the art of the possible, how you could develop and change your typical forms application to something much more modern and appealing. So here is a typical forms application, and here's an example of where we took this application and redeveloped it in ADF. And you can see that we've added some new features and functionality, but it's given it a much more modern look and feel. But there are other ways we can redevelop and design our applications. This is the Summit application that we've shown in the last two slides, which is running on an iPad device. So we're exploiting new channels and having a much more modern look and feel for the application as well. And of course there are other options. This is a screenshot from our simplified UI for our Fusion or cloud applications, and again you can see there are different ways of presenting information because we have a different mantra or set of components that allows us to lay out applications in a much more modern, appealing way. So the final point is to look at, well, if you want to learn Oracle ADF, what resources are there to skill up? Well, the main place to go is OTN. If you Google on OTN JDeveloper or ADF, that should take you to the home page on the OTN Oracle Tech Network, where there's white papers, tutorials, FAQs, and you can download the software. If you go to YouTube, there are a couple of channels called ADF Insider Essentials and ADF Architecture TV. ADF Insider Essentials includes conference level presentations as well as shorter tips and tricks presented as videos, and ADF Architecture TV is an architectural focused channel on how you build applications in ADF and best practices. There's Oracle University courses around ADF, including a certification exam, and if you Google on ADF Academy, we have an interactive online learning tool which currently includes a class for learning about ADF Mobile for building mobile-based applications as well. There are also lots of books ranging from the beginner's guide, like the Quick Start Guide and the Oracle JDeveloper Handbook, up to more advanced books, the Real World Developer Guide, Fusion Developer Guide. There are also other books available as well that you can Google for. There are lots of online events happening, as well as live events such as user groups and Oracle World as well. And it's a good idea to get hooked into some of our social media channels. Many of our product managers and Oracle Aces have blogs or Twitter, and we have a feed on Facebook as well. And of course, if you need help, there is help through not just Oracle support, but our OTN forums as well that's available. So in summary, what have we just learned? Well, the first thing is forms fits the needs that you have for your application, and that's fine, you can use it. But we want you to look at where newer technologies might expand or extend the reach of your current applications and maybe broach new business channels. And it might well be that in the future you have a hybrid approach of older applications or existing applications running forms and some of your new applications running Oracle ADF. I would would encourage you to understand what the business drivers are for the technology choices. Quite often we can be quite religious about or fervent about supporting a particular tool or technology, whether that's Forms or PL SQL or JDeveloper or Eclipse or Apex or anything. But look at what the underlying business drivers are and recognize that maybe the tool is something that comes out of the decision where you better understand what the business drivers and the platform you should choose. I also want to emphasize the importance Oracle ADF has within Oracle. Our Fusion apps, many of our products, and our mobile strategy is all based around Oracle ADF. And of course, there are many customers outside of Oracle who are already using Oracle ADF, and we have many of those customer stories on OTN if you want to look up at those as well. So thank you very much for listening. There's some other links here if you would like to check those out as well. And enjoy the rest of the Virtual Developer Day.